What are the best third actions to take in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Which ones are they? And is this third time actually the charm? No, you're still gonna miss. Please do something other than attack or I'm gonna lose my freaking mind. This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In this video chapter, I'm going to go over that pesky third action that always comes up and how you should best utilize it. This mostly affects new players, but I've seen some experienced players sometimes not really know what to do with that last action. Because unfortunately in this system, the multiple attack penalty does exist, so attacking again generally is not going to help you. It can be useful at rare times, but it's probably not all that worth it when there's a million other things you can do that are a lot more effective. And no matter your build, at some point during a campaign, you're going to have one action left over and you're not going to be sure what to do with it, and that's what this video is here for. If you find this video chapter helpful and or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing, joining as a member, or take a look at my Patreon, donate via coffee, all to help keep this channel alive. Regardless, thanks for checking it out. So let's interact with the environment to start the music. So, first things first, this tier list will include abilities that all player characters can do, but the latter part will include things that are more build specific. But fear not, these actions are not class specific. You're not going to hear me telling you to exploit vulnerability for your third action or something. I mean, you should be doing that as your first action if you're Thaumaturge anyway, you fool. PF2E has a lot of single actions that anyone can do. So, in an attempt to make this list simpler, we'll be starting with more general actions that any PC can do, and as we move through the list, we'll start looking at more build specific options that may require feats or dedications, etc., but they're not going to be class specific, meaning that technically, and that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, these actions could work with any PC. As for skill actions that require certain feats, such as battle medicine, I will include near the end of this video a brief skill feat super package list where I'll quickly go over them, but otherwise this list doesn't have any actions that require skill feats. The idea for this video chapter is that you've currently used 2 of your 3 actions and you're not sure what to do last. In an ideal world, you've already considered your whole turn before it comes to it, and so realistically you shouldn't have that last action available. But that's more like a white room scenario and it's not always applicable. There's lots of things that can change on the battlefield in between your turns. So this list will not include actions that are not going to be helpful to you as a specific third action, such as create a diversion, as this particular action only works in your current turn, which is why you should consider doing these sorts of actions at the start of your turn. These third actions will be judged on how often they are worth using, whether or not they're going to trigger reactions or make your life even harder, and generally their usefulness and tactical effectiveness and all the other nesses that you can think of. And I will not be judging them based on how niche they are for a particular build. If you're a tanky character, and I'm talking about a tanky ability that I think is excellent, it's going to get a high ranking despite it not being all that useful for squishy characters. Now, as there's a million actions in Pathfinder 2 you can do even from level 1, I'll not include literally every single one of them. Most are incredibly use case only, like standing or averting gaze, and some require specific feats and builds, etc. So I'm going to throw these on screen right now so you know I will not be mentioning them. This isn't an exhaustive list, by the way, just the majority of the miscellaneous actions I won't be mentioning as they don't really fit this tier list. Oh, and lastly, this video chapter doesn't really consider what you would do if you're quickened and effectively have 4 actions per turn. Just pointing that out to the pedantic people out there who will bring it up. Somehow they do exist. Oh yeah, and this is a tier list, so it's going to be entirely opinionated and not necessarily factual. Right, that's sort of preamble, let's dive in. Let's kick things off with the most basic form of movement, the stride. As a third action, striding away from an enemy is incredibly potent for messing with the enemy's action economy. If you hit an enemy twice and then stride away, you're forcing them to spend their first action just walking up to you to retaliate, so long as they don't have a ranged attack or whatever. Although you could be striding behind a wall where they have no chance of hitting you at all, which is nice. That's one less strike they get to make against your beautiful face, or in my case, my front cover. However, there is a massive elephant in the room, reactive strike. If you know the enemy has it, striding is a terrible idea unless you want to get punched on the buttocks. There's also another slight issue in that you may have to stride back yourself if the enemy doesn't decide to attack you on its next turn. So because of this and the whole needing a recall knowledge check to see whether or not the enemy has reactive strike, I'm gonna put it into B tier. It's great, but it demands situational awareness, something I know most people in supermarkets have never had. Next action. The humble step. Moving a measly 5 feet might not sound like much, but it could be the difference between getting slapped and getting scowled at, all without triggering reactions, unlike a stride. If you're a squishy caster who just blasted a monster in the face, stepping away means a melee brute without reach has to waste an action just to get back into your personal space. And there's feats you can take to increase your step distance, which is pretty cool. For martial characters, stepping into a flanking position to set up your allies before your turn ends is an excellent tactical move. It's safe, it manipulates the battlefield, and it frustrates the GM. The only downside, as I said, is if the enemy has reach, etc., then you may have just wasted an action. But still, this is an easy A tier third action. Onwards and potentially upwards, depending on how good your athletics skill is. Here's one that a lot of players completely forget exists until they're staring down a pool of bubbling acid, the leap action. For a single action, you can horizontally jump 10 feet or 15 feet if your base speed is at least 30 feet without needing to make an athletics check. This is a potentially great third action to do because leaping allows you to completely bypass ground-based hazards and difficult terrain. If an enemy spellcaster just flung a nasty grease spell on the ground or someone dropped some caltrops across the floor, striding through it is going to hurt your poor self. Leaping over it gets you to safety, it sets you up for the next turn without suffering any of those nasty ground effects. However, the leap action still has the move trait, so you might be triggering reactions similarly to if you just strud. Plus, if you have the quick jump athletics skill feat, you can use high jump and long jump as a single action, increasing the vertical or horizontal distance that you have jumped, although it is going to require an athletics check at that point. A leap can potentially be even better than a stride if you are built for it. However, it generally is a bit more dependent on the environment, so I'm going to throw this into a highly respectable B tier. Moving on. If you are not intending to aid anyone in your life, what are you doing exactly? To aid, you must use an action on your turn to prepare to help an ally, and then you must use your reaction later to actually grant them the bonus. Thanks to the remaster, the flat DC to aid is usually an incredibly easy DC 15, and by mid to high levels, you will be critically succeeding on this constantly, handing out a +3 or even +4 circumstance bonus to your allies' attacks or skill checks. The only downside is that it does eat your reaction, which competes with things like your own reaction strike, shield block, or certain class abilities, but if your reaction is usually free anyway, I'm looking at you spellcasters, giving your fighter a rogue an effective +2 to +4 to hit on the biggest attack is astronomical in PF2E's tight maths. Because it takes away your reaction, I'll put it in a very high A tier, but in a strictly team-focused build, it behaves like an S, you know, like kind of like me in every aspect of everything I do, yeah? Yeah? No. Let's keep going. This one is a bit of a wild card, interacting with the environment. Sometimes the best use of your third action isn't attacking or moving, but manipulating the battlefield itself. I'm talking about slamming a door to shut off a spellcaster's line of effect, flipping a table to create cover, or pulling a lever to drop a portcullis on some poor goblin's head. They deserve it though, because they're a goblin. Breaking line of sight and line of effect in PF2E is incredibly powerful as it completely shuts down many spells and ranged attacks. However, you have to remember that interact is a manipulate action. That means it absolutely will trigger a reactive strike if you're doing it in the face of an enemy who has that reaction. It's also entirely dependent on your GM actually providing an interactive environment in the first place. Because it's highly situational but potentially encounter winning when the stars align, I'm going to put it into a B tier. When it works, you feel like a tactical genius. When you're fighting in an empty grass field, well, not so much. I'm pretty sure that interacting with the grass doesn't do much for you unless you're a cow or something, which I guess is quite possible in this system now I think about it. Next. Right, hear me out on this one. Dropping prone. Yes, voluntarily throwing yourself face first into the dirt. Why on Galarian would you spend an action to do this? Well, if you're caught in a ranged firefight, being prone grants you a +2 circumstance bonus to your AC against ranged attacks. Yes, I know it says +4, but you're off guard as well, so it's +4 -2 because pies are very confusing. Just don't ask questions, it's easier that way. If you're getting peppered by goblin shorebows or a nasty goblin sniper, hitting the deck can absolutely save your bacon, whether it's vegan or meat. But there are massive downsides. First off, drop prone has the move trait, which means it does trigger reactions like reactive strike if you do it within enemy reach. Secondly, while you get your bonus against range attacks, you're off guard to melee attacks, taking a -2 penalty to AC. And don't forget, standing back up next turn will cost you another action, which also potentially triggers reactions. And when you're prone, you take a -2 circumstance penalty to attack rolls. Honestly, I'm going to put this into C tier. It has its moments in specific range encounters, but most of the time you're going to want to stay on your feet. Next third action, please. Taking cover is the smarter cousin of dropping prone. This is a phenomenal third action if you're playing a squishy caster or a ranged martial character. If you're already behind standard cover, like a wall, a large tree, or a doorway, spending an action to take cover bumps that up to greater cover, and that's a +4 circumstance bonus to your AC, reflex saves, and your stealth checks to hide. And even if you don't have cover, but you're near a feature that could grant it, taking this action lets you hunker down and gain a standard cover for +2 bonus. This also applies if you're using a tower shield, or if you actually did use your second second action to drop prone. The sheer amount of survivability this grants for a single action is kinda staggering. If you have the terrain to support it, shooting off a spell and then ducking behind a pillar with take cover is textbook Pathfinder tactics. And I should know all about textbooks. It's because I'm a book, in case you didn't get that. It is incredibly effective, entirely rules legal, and keeps your healer from stressing out. Seriously, not enough people take cover in this system. This is easily an A tier third action. Onwards we go. Sometimes the best thing you can do with your third action is prepare for your next turn. Drawing an item, whether that's yanking a healing potion off your belt, pulling out a scroll of fireball, or unsheathing a backup silver dagger, is a phenomenal way to set yourself up for success later. You don't want to start your next turn needing to heal a dying ally with a potion, only to realize you have to waste 2 stride actions just getting to them, meaning you can only now draw your potion and not heal them until your next turn. But once again, this is an interact action which has the manipulate trait and can trigger reactive strike if you're in the danger zone, and a crit here may also interrupt that action. But if you're safe from reactions, getting your tools ready ahead of time is just smart play. Because this is more about future setup than immediate impact, I'm gonna put it into B tier. More actions, please. The Seek action is great if you are fighting an invisible enemy or a rogue in the shadows, or you just have a sneaking suspicion that the bushes are looking at you funny. This allows you to scan an area to detect hidden or undetected creatures. And this doesn't trigger reactions unless your GM is very mean, and this means you can furiously scan the battlefield right in front of a monster's face and you should be safe. Well, safe in inverted commas anyway, when you were ever really truly safe in PF2E. And remember, speaking 1 sentence per turn in PF2E is a free action, so if you spot a hidden enemy, you can shout to your allies, there's someone hidden nearby, just to let your team know what's going on. Knowing where the danger is coming from is half the battle. It's situational, but it's incredibly useful when it matters. B tier. Onto the natural follow-up to Seek. So, point out. Let's say you used your second action to seek and you successfully spotted an undetected enemy. You know where they are, but mechanically your allies still don't. By spending an action to point out, you indicate the enemy's location, reducing their condition from undetected to merely hidden from your allies. This still has a DC 11 flat check to successfully hit them, but at least you know what square they're in. Plus, you're not going to have your fighter waste their turn swinging at empty air, because even if it feels good to crit against nothing, it still isn't all that useful tactically. However, point out does have the auditory, visual, and manipulate trait. Sticking your finger out and shouting he's right there will absolutely trigger a reactive strike if you do it within enemy reach, probably chopping off your finger in the process. And your GM may rule that no one knows where you're pointing at now that your finger is on the floor. Because point out requires you to have already successfully used Seek or naturally have better senses than your party, it's very situational. When you need it, you really need it, so I'm going to put it into C tier. Now this next one is going to make you want to slap me, but bear with it. Oh yeah, and we're now moving on to the more build-specific third actions, so bear that in mind. Yeah, I know, it wasn't the whole point of this video chapter to consider replacements for using something with the attack trait a third time. Yes, it was, but shush. Though let me be clear, for the vast majority of characters, doing this is a pretty terrible idea. And I'm not just talking about choosing to strike again, I'm talking about any action that has the attack trait and suffers from the multiple attack penalty. That means grapple, shove, reposition, trip, and disarm, and because of map, your third attempt at any of these is generally sitting at a devastating -10 penalty or -8 if you're using an agile weapon or unarmed attack. Unless you're playing a Flurry Ranger, the maths in PF2E is too tight for this to be all that effective. You are essentially just rolling the dice and praying for a natural 20. Wasting an action of 5% chance to hit or succeed when you could have stepped, taken cover, set up flank for your allies, etc. is bad tactics, plain and simple. Unless the enemy is on exactly 1 hit point and you are completely desperate, or if this strike or maneuver will only be your second rather than third this turn, or if you know the enemy has an AC or Fortitude DC as low as the IQ of summoner players, you probably shouldn't do this. It's one hell of a trap option and it belongs firmly in the darkest depths of D tier, along with this channel. And the next action definitely requires some proficiency, so keep that in mind. If you're already benefiting from cover, etc. at the end of your turn, why not take things a step further and actually hide? By spending an action to roll a secret stealth check against the enemy's perception DC, you can elevate your defensive position and become formally and officially, by the eyes of all gods, including your GM, which I'm included in, yes, I'm a god, get over it, hidden. This is fantastic because if an enemy wants to target you with an attack or a targeted spell while you are hidden, they have to succeed at a DC 11 flat check first. That's a straight up 50% chance for their attack to completely miss you, regardless of their attack bonus. Low AC means nothing when they miss half of their attacks anyway. And Hide does not have the manipulate or move trait, so no triggers, no reactions. Because it requires you to already have some sort of cover or some sort of concealment, it isn't always available, but when it is, it's a stellar defensive and offensive setup. For how useful it is for certain builds, I'm going to give it A tier. It's not always going to be something you can do, but when you can, it's very much worth it. This next action both does and doesn't require proficiency, all depending on your level and GM, and it's too good of an action to not include in the main part of this tier list. Right, pay attention. I mean, you should have been doing that throughout the entire video, but actually properly pay attention. I've said this before, and I'll say it 8 more times and then never again. Please don't track that. This is one of the most important actions in the entire system. Recall Knowledge. Pathfinder 2e is a tactical game built around exploiting weaknesses and avoiding resistances. If you're fighting a weird fleshy amalgamation of tentacles and teeth, swinging your sword blindly is a good way to get yourself murderized. Spending your third action to recall knowledge using Arcana, Nature, Religion, Society, or a specific lore skill lets the GM give you vital clues. But the real reason this is so highly rated is because this is how you find out if a monster has a nasty reaction of death. If you don't know whether it's safe for your party to stride away, cast a spell, or drink a potion, or say hello, you need someone to recall knowledge to find out. It has the concentrate trait, meaning it's entirely safe to use in melee, and it can single-handedly turn the tide of an encounter. Honestly, it should probably be your first action in a lot of fights, but as a third action filler, it's delicious. S tier. The next one is for all the lovely spellcasters out there. Sustain. Well, this one is primarily for the spellcasters in the audience. Some magic items and class abilities use it too. If you cast a spell that has a sustained duration, like a summoned creature, an aura, or a floating weapon, it will simply blink out of existence if you don't spend an action to sustain it on your subsequent turns. But sustaining a spell is almost always more action efficient than casting a brand new one. You get the ongoing effects of a high level spell for the cost of a single measly action. It has the concentrate trait, which again, it means no reactive strikes to worry about from those standard melee monsters. So if you have an active spell that requires sustaining, this isn't just a good idea for your third action, it's practically mandatory. It would be the perfect definition of S tier, but as it's a bit more situational and it depends whether or not you actually have a spell currently on the go, and I put it into A tier instead. Now onto one that surprisingly doesn't have a skill proficiency requirement. Using intimidation, even while untrained, to demoralize the absolute life out of an enemy is one of the strongest things you can do in PF2e, though you probably do want some proficiency in it. A success makes them frightened 1, and a crit success makes them frightened 2, lowering all of their stats and DCs, including their AC. The problem with Demoralize is that timing matters. If you Demoralize as your third action, you've already made your attacks for the turn without the benefit of the enemy's lowered stats. Yes, your allies will take advantage of it, and that's great, but remember that the frightened condition decreases by 1 at the end of an enemy's turn, so you're missing out on exploiting the debuff yourself. It's fantastic for the team, it only has the auditory and concentrate traits and no reactive strikes, but because of the poor action sequencing, it drops to B tier as a third action. If this was a first action tier list, this would probably be an A tier. We're now moving into the even more build specific actions, so keep that in mind. The gold standard of martial defense, the undisputed champion of the third action for frontliners, raising a shield. Doing this grants you a +2 circumstance bonus to your AC, +1 if it's a buckler, +3 if it's a fortress shield. In a game where every +1 matters immensely, giving yourself a +2 to your AC can genuinely be the difference between getting critically hit and taking 0 damage. And as I always say, AC in PF2E is not all that much about stopping you from taking hits, but crits, that's what high AC is all about stopping. And raising a shield doesn't have the manipulate trait, meaning you can turtle right up to a monster's face without triggering a reactive strike. Obviously, it does require for you to own a shield and have it on your hand, strapped to your arm, etc., but bolstering your physical defenses is almost always the smartest play you can make to end your turn. And of course, as a reaction, once you've raised your shield, you can shield block, reducing damage pretty significantly. This is absolutely S tier for any tanky builds out there. Back to spellcasters. So, what do you do if you don't have a heavy chunk of metal strapped to your arm and instead have glowies happen around your hands? Well, if you're a spellcaster or you've dipped into a casting dedication, casting a one-action spell is effectively your equivalent. Though make sure to pay attention on which spells have the manipulate trait, and you should already be paying attention because I told you to pay attention at the recall knowledge bit. The most obvious choice here is the shield cantrip, which gives you a +1 circumstance bonus to AC and lets you use the shield block reaction to reduce damage, all without the manipulate trait. You could also cast guidance to give an ally +1 status bonus to a crucial roll, or drop a 1-action force barrage for guaranteed unmitigated force damage with 0 chance to miss. And the Champion and Blessed One dedications also get the focus spell Lay on Hands or Touch of the Void, which is a single action heal/save based damage spell to either help your allies, yourself, or hinder your enemies, which is another great option for a single action spell, and there's plenty more out there. Just keep an eye out for that Manipulate trait. But throwing out a quick bit of magic to buff, defend, or chip away at an enemy is incredibly action efficient. Easily another A tier option for the magically inclined. And the final action is... If you have an animal companion, a familiar, a follower, or even just a trained guard dog you bought in town, this is quite frankly the most mathematically efficient third action in the entire system. And that's because you're trading 1 action to give your minion 2 actions. You're actually generating action economy. Your animal companion can stride into a flanking position to make the enemy off guard for your ally, and then strike. Your familiar can scurry over to a dying ally and feed them a healing potion, so long as they have the manual dexterity and item delivery abilities. The possibilities are endless, and you get all of that for the low price of your final action. Commanding does not trigger reactions, though you do actually need to be able to speak out loud. Because of the sheer numerical advantage of turning 1 action into 2, this is an undeniable S tier. If you have a companion, commanding them each and every turn is a no-brainer. Oh, and eventually you'll get mature animal companion or similar feats, and they get to do 1 move/strike action for free each turn anyway, which is just amazing. And followers are just crazy strong, so I'm not even going to start with that. Okay, onto the skill feat super package entry. As I said near the start of the video, there's quite a lot of these, so I'm going to very briefly go over them and give each of them a quick rating, and I hope to the gods I included all of them, because there's quite a lot. And all of these do indeed require either skill feats or proficiencies for them to work, so bear that in mind. Assurance is indeed a skill feat you need to grab, and while maneuvers with the attack trait like trip or shove, etc. will suffer map, Assurance gets rid of that penalty entirely, though it also doesn't include your attribute modifier, so no strength is added to these attacks. That means you can swing twice with your weapon and then confidently attempt to sweep the leg without that huge multiple attack penalty ruining your day. But because of that lack of an attribute modifier, this generally only works on weaker enemies, those with terrible saves, recall knowledge is your friend, remember, or those that have been significantly debuffed, and thus this is going to be a C tier action for me. With a battle medicine that requires training in medicine, you can patch up an ally mid-combat without spending a spell slot, but it does have the Manipulate trait, so watch out for reactive strikes. The medic dedication and investigator subclass forensic medicine makes battle medicine significantly better. A tier. If you have master proficiency in religion, you can blast an enemy with a battle prayer. If this deals aligned damage, though I guess that would be holy/unholy now. You do this by aggressively quoting scripture at them, and because it's a saving throw, it doesn't suffer from map. It starts at 1d6 and then goes to 3d6 once you're legendary in religion. A crit kind of doubles that. It's quite nice, honestly. It's kind of cool to get a little damaging effect with no map, and it's religion based, which is quite interesting, though it is once a day per enemy though, so B tier. With training in diplomacy, you can hurl a devastating quip, aka a bon mot. This lowers enemy will saves and perception DCs, perfectly setting up your spellcasters for the next turn. Massively underrated, and your spellcasters will love you if you do this. A tier. If you are trained in thievery and have a hand free and are within melee reach of an opponent, you can make a thievery check against their reflex DC to make them clumsy 1 for a round with a dirty trick. On a crit success, the clumsy 1 until they use an interact action to end the impediment, which technically means that can trigger reactive strikes, which is nice. However, doing this has the Manipulate trait, so that can cause a reactive strike. Because of this plus map, though you can use this with Assurance, I think this has got to be C tier, sadly. With Master and Diplomacy, you can evangelize an enemy and point out a cosmic hypocrisy to make them stupefied or stupefied 2 on a crit, which can absolutely ruin a rival spellcaster's day. Honestly, if you're fighting a spellcaster, this is fantastic, as it could potentially stop them from casting a spell entirely and lose the spell slot and only cost you 1 action, so I'm gonna go for A tier. With training in Deception, you can feint, but this off-guard effect expires in your current turn unless you get a crit success, which makes this a pretty bad gamble. It's not really worth it, and probably D tier immediately. Master level Religion once per hour lets you quickly call for a Sacred Defense to grant yourself a solid buffer of temporary hit points to help you survive the upcoming monster's turn. The problem is the temp health is only a small amount, starting at 5, and with Legendary Proficiency Religion going to 15, both doubled on a crit, and the DC is kinda high, so B tier. With Legendary Deception, deception. You can reveal machinations to convince a humanoid that you are a recurring part of their life, inflicting frighten 2 or 3 on a crit and giving you free recall knowledge information like an absolute mastermind. So this is a way to give the enemy the frighten condition using deception rather than intimidation, and you get a free recall knowledge on top of that. It's rare, however, and that legendary proficiency is a bit tough, plus it may not work on non-humanoids depending on your GM. So let's go with B tier. Last but not least, at legendary, this intimidation feat lets you glare at a lower level enemy so menacingly that they have to make a fortitude save or literally drop dead of a heart attack as you scare them to death. Now, if this was 100% just my opinions and nothing else mattered, I'd make this S tier because it's hilarious, but I think this is more like an A tier ability because of the whole in-cap trait. I just love this feat, honestly. I love the idea of a massive dragon or a huge demon falling dead and dying of a heart attack because you had stood behind a door and went bleh. So that is my list. As ever, I hope it was helpful. This video's gone on long enough, so I better leave that there. If you found this video chapter any good, please give it a like, subscribe, add a comment talking about awesome times you've utilized some of these third actions. Please consider looking at my Patreon to become a member, all that stuff. And thanks to Tier Maker, the website for the whole tier list thing. Links are in the description as ever, as are links to the portfolio of my lovely artist Leandro Notado. I'd like to thank my archivists and members: Max Magnus 20019, Ozzy Smith, Nikolai Milenkovic, Carl Travis, Bent Fair, Apteryx 13, and patrons and archivists Clash Q and Patrick O'Donoghue. But for now, this is Dominic of the Dominini Nom Minimini Nom Nominimini Nominimi Nominimi Nomicom, wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.